I know if I hunt where the does are, I'll see the bucks eventually. Buck sign has drove me crazy over the years. I can't tell you how much time I wasted on rub lines and scrapes and never see that deer. And finally, I started realizing just go where the girls are because the boy's coming. Because the buck's coming to where the girls are. That can actually start early, even in bow season.
All right, Mr. Ralph Barton, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm so excited to talk to you. We've already been here for a while. You know, as you saw, it takes us forever to set up all this stuff we got to record these, and we've been talking a lot, and it's been really difficult for the last hour or so to not ask you a bunch of questions because we're trying to save it for the podcast.
Yeah. Well, I am pretty shy. It's hard to get me to say anything.
So Ralph, tell the audience who you are, where you're from, everything like that.
Okay, my name's Ralph Barton, and I'm an obsessed outdoorsman, and I've grown up in Virginia in most of my life in the same county, and I'm retired now. I'm a full-time hunting and fishing, and I retired 4 years ago, so I'm really enjoying that.
That's exciting. And Ralph, you came highly recommended to us by one of our past podcast guests, Mr. Jim Forbes. When we were trying to figure out some guys that we wanted to have on in Virginia, he was like, you got to have this guy on. And also, Jeff over at Star City Whitetails highly recommended you. So it's full circle getting you on the podcast.
Yeah, well, Jim and Jeff, they're both, I consider them brothers. Jim is a great national forest hunter. He's killed some nice deer, as I'm sure you've seen. I think he's got 25 or 30 on the wall. Including that big wide one, it's about 25 inches. And of course, you know, we've talked about what Jeff's done for the community through Star City Whitetails. And yeah, they're both great guys. And I really appreciate the recommendation. I'm humbled by it because, you know, I'm not sure I qualify, but I'll be glad to sit here and talk your ear off.
Absolutely. Well, I want to get into, we're going to talk a little bit about your hunting style and how you like to hunt on national forest here, public land in Virginia, which can be very challenging. We've interviewed a few other guys from Virginia that hunt national forests, and there's a lot of commonalities from the difficultness of just finding deer because of low deer densities, the thick cover, the high elevation. So a lot of things kind of working against you when it comes to just finding deer. And one thing you were telling us earlier, which we're going to talk about, is you're a big bow hunter in the mountains.
Yes.
Which we don't find that very often, and very excited to talk to you about it. But one thing I want to start out with, I want to learn a little bit more about what was your upbringing deer hunting like in Virginia?
Well, so I'm a little different probably than most guys. I did not grow up in a hunting family. I didn't have a mentor. I don't know how, but somehow I was born wanting to hunt and fish and loving nature. My memories go back as far as, like, I guess I was 4 years old and going in the creek and turning over rocks and catching crawdads, catching every little critter I could find. And then when I graduated up to being able to shoot a slingshot, I was hunting for birds. And, you know, for whatever reason, I was obsessed with it from day one. And I just learned on my own. And I mean, I had some help with like, had friends that maybe I went hunting with their family and things like that. But pretty much just came up on my own doing it. And one thing that kind of stands out in my memory when I was real little, a neighbor that had a big stack of ancient Sports Afield and Outdoor Life magazines. Had like 3 big boxes of them, and gave them to me. And I spent probably 5 or 6 years of my childhood reading those over and over and over and over. And I just, you know, I was obsessed with it. But that's kind of where I started, and I've been doing it ever since. I'm not interested in anything else. I don't follow sports or nothing. I mean, it's hunting and fishing. Yeah.
Oh, you're the perfect guy to talk to. I love that. So, just real quick, you said you weren't born in a hunting family. Was your family like? Did y'all do much in the outdoors, fishing, anything else, or like what was your introduction to all of that?
No, I grew up rural in farmland, and so, you know, I had resources around me. I had woods, had farm ponds. The farmers had ponds. You go fish. But no, I had nobody like me. I didn't have a father, grandfather, uncle, or anything that hunted or fished.
Interesting.
And which makes me a little unusual because that's usually how people get their start.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I was just born with it.
You're born with that.
Born crazy.
I was to say, born with the hunter's instinct. So, one thing I want to kind of dive into is bow hunting in the mountains, okay? Mm-hmm. But to kind of give people an idea who are not familiar with this area of the state of Virginia, what is the terrain and the habitat like on some of the national forests that you typically are hunting around?
Steep mountains, steep ridges. The area where I hunt is 2,000 foot elevation up to about 4,500 foot elevation. And we have, like I say, real rugged terrain. Most everything is straight up and down. The only exception would be like little flats or creek bottoms where ridges come down. You might have a flatter area, but it's pretty much all steep terrain. And the food sources, the main food source, of course, is acorns. There's always browse as well, but acorns is the main food source. And the bedding areas are usually mountain laurel thickets. And the deer share that same habitat with the bears. There's also bears in our area. The bear population has really grown in Virginia over the last 20 years. But that's basically the way it is. Straight up and down, steep, rugged mountains. Yeah.
So it sounds like an unforgiving place, especially as a bow hunter.
Yeah, if you shoot one, you better hope he doesn't go downhill away from your truck, and that's because that's usually what they'll do. Because it's hard. It's hard to get them back up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what was your evolution on bow hunting in the mountains? When did you start picking up bow hunting? And
well, I started bow hunting as a child when I was young, and when I first started hunting, I had access to local farmlands. The farmers would always let anybody hunt, and that's how I started. But then, as time went on, farmers died off. The family sold the farms, and it got harder and harder to access private lands. And I just turned to the mountains because there was so much of it. I didn't have to worry about permission and losing permission and things like that. And I love the mountains because they're so vast. You can be there and you're not going to hear any human sounds. I'm not hearing cows mooing and chainsaws and, things like that. And they're so vast that you never know what's over that next ridge. If I want to explore a little bit, there's so much land to hunt. You could spend a lifetime looking at new places. And I love that. I like that.
Gosh. Okay. So what was the intro for you bow hunting the mountains? You said you kind of got started early, again, as a kid bow hunting. You then started checking out public land in the mountains. What was the trials and I can't talk. Trial and tribulation, really, is what I'm looking at, of cutting your teeth as a bow hunter in the mountains?
Well, it was difficult. I'm not going to kid you. So when I first started bow hunting the mountains, the hardest thing was trying to nail down where a deer was going to be in bow range from my stand. Okay, it's a little bit easier with a rifle because you can get in a nice ridge and see several trails, maybe see 100 yards through the woods. Well, that doesn't work for bow hunting. And when you get in the mountains, there's so many trails, it's hard to determine exactly which ones the deer are using. And we'll probably touch on this later, but game cameras. When game cameras came along, that was a game changer for me. Being able to monitor trails and figure out what deer are doing. But it was really a lot of trial and error. I'd set up a stand. I can't tell you how many times I set up a stand. I'd watch deer. I'd have to move it 20 yards or 50 yards, And finally, through trial and error, a lot of times that's how I would eventually get a deer. And of course, in the early years, I was happy to kill anything. In Virginia, during bow season, you can kill a doe or a buck. So a lot of times in my early years of bow hunting, I would kill a doe. That's what I got a shot at, or maybe a small buck, But also in that era, we weren't. There wasn't so much obsession with antlers, because at one time in Virginia, in my lifetime, I've seen an amazing increase in the deer population. I mean, it's probably a success story in game management that's unheard of. Because I grew up with hardly any deer, and as a matter of fact. I'm going to get nostalgic now for a little bit, but I can remember being young, just driving, 16 years old, and you could have a 4-pointer in the back of your truck and go to the check station, and hunters would gather from everywhere just to gawk at a 4-pointer, and they'd stand around and talk. And because at that time, a deer was valued. Any deer was so valued because they were so hard to see. And also in that time, you could only kill one deer for the whole season with any weapon. And a lot of counties around here didn't even have a deer season. And I've seen that in my lifetime. So didn't mean to digress off to the main topic, but
that's actually exactly where I was about to go with it.
Oh, okay.
You hear that a lot in Alabama too.
Yeah.
Most parts of the state just didn't really have great huntable populations until about the 70s, getting into the 80s is when it started. The population rose up and a lot of people started getting into deer hunting. And we were just mentioning this to someone yesterday that, especially in Alabama, if we talk to someone who's over the age of about 60, they're usually the first. They're usually a first generation deer hunter.
Yeah.
In Alabama. Their grandpa didn't deer hunt. Their grandpa quail hunted in Alabama.
Yeah, or rabbits or squirrels.
Yeah, small.
I grew up with squirrels. That was how I learned to hunt. But yeah.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the squirrel hunting. When you very first, are squirrels the very first thing that you just started hunting?
Because
it's accessible.
First of all, in the county I lived in, that's all there was. There weren't any deer. In the county I grew up in, there weren't any deer there, or not many. So squirrels was how I started, and I tell you what, I think squirrel hunting is probably the best training a hunter can go through. I had a single shot .22 rifle. When I was a kid, you didn't have school shootings and all this, so I got a rifle when I was 7 years old. Had a single shot .22 with open sights, and if you can learn to go out there and hunt squirrels and pop them out of the tree with that rifle, with the single shot .22. It's the best training in the world for hunting and woodsmanship. Squirrels can be sneaky, especially if they get hunted. And so that's how I cut my teeth, so to speak, on hunting for the squirrels.
Now, what age did the deer really start coming back for you?
So when I was 12, 13 years old, I think we just had started getting the season in the county I lived in, but there wasn't enough deer to hunt. Most people would travel to other counties in the national forest. At that time, the national forest was actually better hunting. It's better than it is now, and that's because of habitat management stuff, that's another topic. But a lot of people would go off to other counties. And my first experience deer hunting, I had a neighbor that I mowed his yard, and he knew I didn't have anybody to take me. He actually took me, and I killed my first deer in the national forest. Of all things, even though I lived on private land, there was more deer there. But that was a really, real exciting thing for me. And I didn't know anything. And I'll be honest with you, it was total luck. And it was a spike buck. Yeah.
Did you know many other deer hunters back then, or was it just a few guys getting after it?
No, I didn't know many. No, not many. There were a few. And of course, now when I got into high school and 16, 17, 18, the deer population started growing. And some of the guys I went to school with had some deer on their farm, like their family farms, and were starting to get one every now and then. But even then, I can remember being in high school. If somebody had a Polaroid picture of a deer, you'd be in the lunchroom and everybody would go over there and gang around that guy to go look at that picture, even if it was a spike or a 4-pointer, because that's how rare it was, to get a deer back then. But the population grew fast, though. It's amazing. The county I grew up in that I'm speaking of, it's now one of the top counties in the state. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, so how long did it take for you to go from you shot your first deer to then your thing now is you like to target mature bucks? That's what you're looking for, is a mature buck in the mountains. Mm-hmm. So what was that journey like where you went from killing your first spike to I want to kill a mature deer?
I'll be honest with you. For many, many years, I didn't care about the size or the maturity. That probably 20 years in, I started letting some deer go, passing on some deer. But you were just kind of starting to hear about quality deer management and things like that. And of course, also at that time, there were a lot of old wives' tales. Like I can remember growing up, everybody said a spike would never be a trophy buck, which now we know that's not true, right? So you always shot a spike if you saw it. But yeah, I was probably 20 years in before I started getting serious about holding out and waiting for better deer.
Did you make that transition just because you had killed so many deer at that point and you just kind of wanted a challenge, or what was it?
Sort of, yeah. It was kind of like I was looking for a new challenge, I needed something new, and that And of course, every deer hunter dreams of big racks, right? So I started passing up deer to hopefully see bigger ones. And but it was a slow transition, And I'm still, even to this day, I'm not what you would consider a dedicated trophy hunter.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm hunting especially if I haven't burned a tag, if I'm going to use my first tag, if it's a nice 4.5-year-old 8-pointer, I don't care if he's only 15 inches wide or whatever, I'm gonna gladly take him, especially with a bow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then I get as the season goes on, I get more picky. Now my next tag, I'm gonna be a lot more picky. If that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But when you started getting more interested in hunting the mature deer, did you know anybody else at the time who was really targeting mature bucks and was good at it, who you learned from?
No. I mean, I knew, let's see, I can't really say no. I knew a couple guys that had killed some really nice national forest deer, and like Jim Forbes is one of them. And but I'd never really sit down and pick their brain. I just knew they killed some nice ones. But I do remember one thing that stands out. This one older gentleman that I'd met, he killed nice deer pretty much every year on national forest. And he told me, he said, I don't scout. He said, I hunt terrain. And he said, I hunt a terrain feature. He said, I'll sit there in that spot and I'm going to sit there all season if that's what it takes. But he said, I'm going to get a big buck there. And that kind of stuck with me. And it was later before I started putting that to practice, terrain features. But yeah, I mean, I guess more than anything, probably through the media, because, all of a sudden, all the Outdoor Life and Buckmasters and all the magazines were talking about bigger deer, quality deer management and things. So you started seeing it that way, really, at first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing you mentioned earlier that's really cool about really the whole chain of the Appalachian Mountains, whether you're in North Georgia or in Pennsylvania, which we were just in yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
Is that it's such a vast, huge area. And like you said, you can hunt your entire life. And really, you could hunt your entire life and never seen the same spot twice.
Absolutely,
if you didn't want to.
yeah.
And always be seeing new ground. When someone looks at an area that large and vast and steep and rugged, it's like, where do you even start? Like, how could you go out there and find a deer and all that?
Yeah.
So I want to start getting into that with you. So just high level, general rule of thumb, like how do you go out and find deer in such a rugged and vast landscape?
Well, and that's a really good question. So let's say you've never been there. You've never been to the national forest. And you're looking out across the mountains and you're like, wow, where do I go? Okay. In today's world, it's so much easier with mapping because you have Onyx and things like that. But I would say, if I was going to say to somebody, okay, here's what you need to do. First, pick an area that's near your home or where you want to try to hunt, and get a map. Okay, start finding the roadways, whatever road access there is, and maybe you start out in the summer riding those roads, kind of looking around, and then you find some areas that look good. Go out and look for food sources, look for oak trees, look, Forest Service roads, look for old rubs and scrapes. But you got to start, you got to just pick an area and find your access and then work it. You work it hard. Scouting, when hunting mountains, nothing takes the place of scouting. I mean, it takes a lot of work. It really does. Because like you said, because of the vastness, obviously not every square foot of that mountain has deer on it, right? There's going to be key spots. But, like I say, you just have to get in there and do your scouting. But the first thing is if I was going to try to talk to somebody about this and teach them, it would be pick an area, find the road access where you can get in, use your mapping tools. And what's really so nice now, like with and I do this a lot of times, if I'm going to look at a new area, I take my Onyx and I can find the road, and then I can do a line-to-line distance to different places and know exactly how far it is. And, if you learn how to read a topo map, which isn't really difficult, I look at the topo map and I look for like flats, places where ridges come together, benches. There's certain terrain features that will attract deer. And so that's how I would say I would start. Pick an area, get your maps out, and then get in there and do some looking around.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Does that answer it?
Oh yeah. That, I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is what it really comes down to is, look at the map, find your access, but at the end of the day, go find some things you're interested in and just go walk in there, because
Yep.
you're actually going to find the deer with boots on the ground. You're not necessarily going to find them with the map per se.
Yeah. No, yeah, right. The map's just kind of a starting point. And a good example, now last year I killed my rifle buck in the national forest. I killed one with archery season too, but my rifle buck I killed in a new spot, and I had actually moved it to the spot because some other areas had gotten a little bit too much human pressure because it's public land, and I had found this spot starting out with the map, and what attracted me to the spot was two ridges that came in and formed a saddle, and of course the saddle is a great mountain feature, and rutting bucks are going to travel that saddle. Going from bedding area to bedding area, checking on those. And so I actually found it on the map, but I went in there and did my scouting. Actually, I hung a trail camera first, and I found a really active scrape, which is really cool because it's one of the few times I've actually got buck activity on a scrape in the daytime. And so I hung trail camera, saw some bucks, and went in there in rifle season. And matter of fact, it really stands out. It was one of my favorite hunts because the weather was horrendous. It was a blizzard. Start out that morning with 30, 40 mile an hour winds, blowing sleet and snow. When I shot the deer, it was a blizzard blowing. When I shot the deer, when I walked over the deer, he already had a coating of snow on him. That quick. Yeah. So in which just go to show, nasty weather doesn't deter a deer. So that's, like I said, another subject. I don't mean to go off on tangents, but. Yeah, so I actually used that technique myself last year, but now I had found this area in the summer. I didn't wait till deer season, and I had scouted it.
More big bucks probably get killed on clear cuts than anything else, especially when it comes to hunting in the southeast. And back behind me, I've got a really good example of what makes a good spot in a clear cut. So there's two main ingredients you want to look for. You want to look for low spots, and you want to look for habitat diversity. Right here behind me, I've got both of those. We've got this more fresh cut. It's just got some grasses and some saplings in it, but enough that a deer's probably going to feel hidden in it. They're going to want to be in it. And then this hill rolls off, and back behind me over here, we've got a pine thicket. And right there in that lowest spot, this clear cut meets that pine thicket, which is perfect. So I've got my two key ingredients meeting right in the same spot. That's how I can look at this clear cut that's over 100 acres, and I can narrow it down to the spot within the spot. Now, one challenging thing about hunting these spots that you got to watch out for is you could have a deer pop out at 50 yards, but you could also have one pop out at 450. For that reason, I like carrying a pair of range-finding binoculars. These are the brand new Ranger 3000s from Vortex. They've got great glass, they've got a great price point, they're thin and they're lightweight, they fit my bino harness just perfect. The reason I like carrying a pair of range-finding binoculars is so I don't have to fumble with two separate objects, like get my binos up, see it's a shooter, and then try to get the rangefinder out. I can do all that at the same time with these, which is going to save me valuable seconds. And if you've hunted something like this, you know that a few seconds can literally completely make or break your hunt. So if you want to check out the Ranger HD 3000s from Vortex, go to eurooptic.com, use the promo code Southern10. It's going to get you a discount on these binoculars or any other optics from Vortex. So y'all go to eurooptic.com, use that code Southern10. It's going to get you a discount on any Vortex products.
There's more of you guys getting into saddle hunting than ever before, and a common question we always get is how do you get comfortable in a saddle, because there's so many moving parts. And today I'm going to give you 3 of the best tips that I have for getting comfortable in the saddle after doing this for about 8.5 years. Number 1 is tether height. Setting your tether at the right height is going to give you extreme comfort, but this is one big reason why you need to practice with it. I like mine right at nose level when I'm standing on the platform. The other is your bridge length. Having an adjustable bridge on your saddle makes it extremely comfortable to fine tune that comfort, and I like mine extended out almost all the way. The third is how you sit in your saddle. Some people like the saddle sitting just below the belt line, which I've done in some saddles in the past. That made it more comfortable. Some are right at the belt line, and some are a little bit above the belt line. Now, having a very comfortable saddle makes it really easy to do all this stuff with less adjustment. And the Lone Star saddle from Latitude Outdoors is that saddle for me personally. I really like this saddle, and I really like the hip pinch reduction system that's built into the saddle that gives me a lot more comfort all day long with less adjustments needed. If you want to check out the Lone Star saddle from Latitude Outdoors, you can go to latitudeoutdoors.com for more information.
One thing we talk about with almost every guest on this show is map scouting. My favorite map scouting tool is LiDAR. If you're unfamiliar, LiDAR is basically like a 3D scan of the Earth's surface. I like to say it kind of takes away all the surprises. LiDAR is now available on onX Hunt on their topography map. If you go to your app right now, click on the topography map, you can flip on that LiDAR feature and boom, it's gonna come on and you're gonna see what I'm talking about. The LiDAR is gonna allow you to see things that are normally hidden from view. This might be ditches, bends and creeks, rocks, old road beds. I personally love old road beds because deer like to walk them. They're great places to find scrapes. They're great camera locations. And you know, before, an old roadbed or an old logging road might be something that you kind of happen upon while you're out scouting or hunting. Well, now with the LiDAR, before I go into an area, I can turn on that LiDAR and I can see exactly where those roadbeds are. Even old logging roads from the 1930s, you can still see them on there. So that allows me to go straight to those spots and check them out. It's just an incredibly helpful tool, and it's available now on onX Hunt. And hey, if you want to get 20% off your onX Elite membership, you can use the promo code SOUTHERN. Like I said, it's going to save you 20%. Go check out that LiDAR feature. You'll be glad you did. Know where you stand with onX Hunt.
Over the years, we've interviewed quite a few successful ground hunters when it comes to bow hunting, and the commonalities between all of them is using the shadows to their advantage. Having overhead cover, back cover, and a little bit of front cover that adds a little bit more shadows to their setup, which allows them to hide a lot easier. That's what we've done today and built this brush blind for Andrew to come in here with his recurve and shoot some does, hopefully early season when these white oaks behind the camera are going to be dropping. One important thing about blending in the shadows is having something that works camel wise in the shadows, and that's one thing I like about this mossy oak woodsman leaf jacket is it's a little bit darker in color, and to me blends in a little bit better to the shadows during early season when you have full leaves on those trees. This is something I'm going to keep in my backpack all season because it's really compact, it's really lightweight, and breathes really well, and I really won't need it until I need it, but it's going to be in my backpack the whole time, which is really nice because of how compact it is. So if you're interested in ground hunting a little bit this year or having extra concealment up in the tree, check out the Mossy Oak Woodsman Leaf Jacket at mossyoak.com.
What do you like to do in the summertime as far as scouting? Kind of like what you're saying, are you going to just checking terrain features?
Well, so I love the mountains. I love hiking the mountains all the time. But also, I love to ride a bike. That's my form of exercise. So I ride a bike through the mountains, on the National Forest roads a lot. And I mean, it's amazing how much ground you can cover and what you can learn on a bike. And also on a bike, it's kind of neat. Animals don't really know what you are sometimes. I'll ride, as long as you don't stop and get off, like I'll spot a deer over in the woods, and they'll look at you. They're not sure what you are because your profile doesn't look what they're used to seeing. But since we're going to talk about scouting, my two favorite times are late winter after season. That's probably the best time to scout. We can talk about it later. But summer, I like to go in late summer because in late summer, usually about July, you're going to be able to start seeing the acorns forming in the trees. Okay, so what I'm going to do in late summer is I'm going to do whatever it takes to find food sources, and the most important food source, like we said in the mountains, is acorns. And acorns will drive you crazy. Acorns in the mountains will absolutely drive you crazy because they'll produce over here and not over here one year. Next year they'll be over here and not over here. Or they won't be anywhere, or they'll be everywhere. Okay? So finding where the acorns are is imperative to finding deer, especially if you're going to early bow hunt, because now when you're early bow hunting, the rut's not in play, so it's about feeding, right? So my first goal is to locate the nuts. And the way I do that, a lot of times you don't see acorns on the lower branches in the National Forest woods because the canopy is so thick that a lot of the lower branches don't produce. A lot of times the nuts are way at the top, 80 foot high, or 60 foot high, whatever. And so I take binoculars and I'm going to go to my oak flats, oak ridges, and I'm going to search for those acorns. And especially white oak, of course. Everybody knows the white oak's preferable over the red oak. But the red oak's important too because the red oak a lot of times lasts longer into the winter. So like in a later season, those red oaks can really come into play. The red oaks also are much more likely to produce than the white oaks. And where I hunt, it's not uncommon to have a white oak area that doesn't produce maybe once every 3-4 years if you're lucky. But so to answer your question, first thing I'm going to do is look for food. Okay, and then of course once I found food, I'm going to study the terrain. I'm going to look for bedding areas, and once I can determine a bedding area and I can determine the food source, then I can start putting the pieces together. Also, that time of year in July and August, I'm not too concerned about scaring deer. So a lot of times I'll bust right through bedding areas just to see what I can see. And even if I jump deer, I'm not worried about it because they have time to get over it before I'm going to hunt them. And I'm not going to push them out. And so a lot of times I'll do that. I'll just go right through the bedding areas and see if I can find beds or actually find deer,
What's a bedding area look like up here?
Well, mainly laurel thickets. Laurel thickets are great bedding areas. But I will say one thing. Sometimes you'll run across a smart old buck that beds right out in the open. And in the mountains, they'll use terrain. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen this happen. I think the first time I experienced it, I was hiking up a steep ridge, wide open timber I could see for 100 yards. Not a thicket in sight. I'm going up this ridge, and all of a sudden, just about the time I get to the crest, this buck comes out of the ground, it looks like. Over the ridge he goes, and all I see is this big rack, going away. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. Where was he at? I didn't see him. So I go on up, and I find where he was at. Where a tree had fell over and created a big hole where the root ball pulled out. He was bedded right there. Right below the crest of the ridge, and you think about how smart this is. He had one jump to make an escape over the other side of the ridge, and he had the advantage of watching all that open woods below him for any danger coming that way. Okay, and the wind was coming over the top of the ridge, so anything behind him he was going to scent, anything below him he was going to see, and happened to be me that he saw, and that was the end of that. Okay, but since that time I've found that a lot. I've found beds. Benches. A bench in a mountain feature, a bench is basically what it sounds like. Like the ridge comes down, you got a flat spot, and that flat spot may run right along the ridge for 100 yards or even longer. But that bench is a perfect place for the deer to get hunkered down, and he can watch below and scent from the other direction. And so sometimes mature bucks won't use thickets. But for the most part, to answer your question, laurel thickets are my favorite bedding area places.
So do you base any of your hunting strategy off those isolated buck beds, or are you just really paying attention to the thickets and those isolated beds are kind of their own thing, but they don't factor into what you're doing?
That's a wide open question. Okay, so I'm going to say something. I'm going to say something that sounds crazy. I really don't care about the bucks that much. Okay, now I'm a buck hunter. Why did I say that? The reason I said that is I know if I hunt where the does are, I'll see the bucks eventually. Buck sign has drove me crazy over the years. I can't tell you how much time I wasted on rub lines and scrapes and never see that deer. And finally I started realizing just go where the girls are because the boy's coming. Because the buck's coming to where the girls are. And that's really what I do now. I mainly hunt the does. If I can get near the does, I know that eventually the bucks can come through. And that can actually start early, even in bow season. Like a lot of times, bucks will start. I think they're kind of getting a little head start on things. They'll roam and checking out where the does are. Because a lot of times I see bucks that look like they're seeking, like the third week of October, even second week of October. Okay, but the only exception to that is back to hunting the bucks. If I get lucky and I can get a buck maybe on a trail camera a few times that's going to feed, then I'll try to hunt him on an early feeding pattern in bow season. That's real tricky. You got to be so careful about at that time he's on red alert because he's not thinking about rutting as much. So he's hard to hunt, and you got to be careful about not letting him detect you hunting him, even to the point of what you're doing with your trail cameras. Like I'm real picky about the trail cameras. I don't walk the trail where the camera's on. I use rubber gloves every time I go in. And since I'm on that subject, I will elaborate a little bit. Something I had to learn to do. When trail cameras first came out, I couldn't wait to go check them. I put it in the woods, and I'm like, man, I got to go see if something's on there. Yeah, I mean, I'd be so excited, right? Well, I learned that I was messing up. I was going too much. And what I do now is I have my cameras on a 2-week cycle. I don't do the cellular. I have mine where you have to physically go and check them, which is all kind of part of my scouting routine. But I have them on a 2-week schedule. So I might have 2 cameras over here, a couple over here, and I'll hit them this week. And next week I'll hit those. And so they alternate. So I try to stay out of the area. Also, I love to go if I can catch a rainy day. No matter what I'm doing, if it starts raining, I'll hit in there. That's the perfect time to scout, check cameras. The rain's going to wash the scent away. Also a great time, if I've already determined where I want to hang a stand, that's a good time to drag a stand in there and put it up too. But if I can find that buck early, I will try to hunt him. But it's I have marginal success. I mean, I've hunted. I've been lucky and killed a few of those, but a whole lot of them evaded me.
That is one of the most interesting subjects to us. It is so hard for us to find people who kill mature bucks consistently early season, really anywhere, but especially in the Southeast and the Appalachian Mountains.
Yeah.
Anywhere in the East, timber country, is very hard for us to find. And so I'm curious, on the ones you have killed in early season, is there anything consistent between those deer that you think helped you be successful on them?
Probably the only consistency was the fact that I figured out they were coming from a bedding area going to a feeding area. Most of the deer that I've killed like that, early bucks, were afternoon deer, evening deer. Now, like saying, it's kind of hard to describe it, but if you can find, if I can find a buck that I can get on trail camera a few times, seemingly going the same direction, going the same place, and I know there's food, there's acorns on the ground over here, and there's sign there. I that's probably the only common denominator is if I can figure out where he's bedding and leave him alone, not spook him, over hunting or hunting with the wrong wind, things like that. If I can figure out where he's feeding, and I'll give you an example. The last one I got like that was a buck that I'd hunted for a couple of years, and his name was Commander, which I know people think that's silly naming deer, but I get attached to him. So I named him Commander because of his stance. A couple of times he'd be in front of the game camera and he'd be like this, all buffed up and like he was the king of the woods, right? But it was kind of neat. The game camera was pointing down a trail. This trail went into a laurel thicket, and behind me was an oak ridge loaded with nuts. And so the does would come down this trail pretty regular. But I started getting him on trail camera, and what I noticed was he was never on the trail, like coming towards the camera. When I'd see him on the camera, he was coming this way. And I'm like, that deer's not doing the same thing as other deer. And then I got to thinking about it. He was bedding in a different spot. Being a mature buck, he was doing his thing. He wasn't with the other deer. And once I kind of figured that out, I set up. And I actually killed him the first time I hunted that particular stand, after I kind of figured out what he was doing, and like I said, there's a lot of, I'm not acting like I got a lot of skill. It was a lot of luck involved. Because as a matter of fact, when he approached me, and I have this on video, when he approached, he came from behind me over my left shoulder and was only like 10 yards. And at the second that I drew the bow, I think he caught my movement because he got really alert. I was just blessed. He could have easily blown out of there. It just, that one little hesitation gave me the chance I needed. But I like I say, I was just fortunate that watching, and that's another thing about trail camera pictures. I've learned over the years to pay attention to little details, like is that buck coming down the trail? Is he crossing this way? Is he always coming this way? I've seen that before. I've seen where every time I saw that buck on a trail camera, here he comes this way. So that's telling me he's coming from over here somewhere. And what time of day is it? If it's consistent, then that you can figure out his bedding or feeding. But does that answer the question?
Yeah,
sort of?
yeah. And by the way, I forgot to mention this on the front end, but you've got a YouTube channel. We'll link it for everybody so they can go find your YouTube channel. But a follow up to that is, when you read in magazines or whatever about hunting early season deer, it's always bed to food. Like, you want to find that bed to food pattern. And I think what makes it so hard anywhere you have big woods, but especially up here in the mountains, is that defined bed and defined food pattern, it gets really blurry because there's kind of a lot of bedding everywhere and there's food everywhere too.
Yes.
And so you're hunting, to bring up what a past guest said one time, you're kind of hunting a scenario more than you're hunting a deer. Like, you're trying to find that good bedding cover with a really good food source right next to it, right? And you just don't find that every year.
No. And that where that comes in, and it's very, very good, to talk about, because now when you're bow hunting that early season and you're trying to determine that bed to food, there's nothing can take the place of having lots of days to hunt, because a lot of times I make 6 or 7 adjustments to a stand over a period of a couple weeks, because I see this deer and I'm like, yeah, he's 20 yards too far. Okay, now I got to think, can I get in that tree? Will the wind be right? Will I have enough cover? But I'm blessed that I get to hunt all the time, every day basically since I retired, and so what I lack in skill, I just use persistence. I just keep going, and keep moving the stand, and hope that someday he messes up and gets close enough. But you're exactly right. It's very, very difficult. Now there is one exception. Every now and then in the mountains, when you get these situations where acorns become spotty and there'll be just a few places with nuts, then every animal around there will flock to that. And I don't see that often. But one year, I'll never forget it. There was a little flat. 3 ridges came down, and there was a little flat. And there was maybe 8 or 10 white oaks right there that dropped nuts like crazy. And I couldn't even walk in there at any time of day, middle of 4 o'clock in the morning or afternoon, anytime, without spooking animals. And every time I'd go in there, I'd see not only deer, I'd see bear, turkeys, everything was flocking there, because those white oaks there weren't any more around. Okay. Now, when you get lucky and get one of those situations, and by the way, I killed a nice buck there and a bear that year. Those situations are kind of rare, but if you can find one of those, it's a gold mine, and hunt it hard and hunt it right. That's all I can say.
Yeah, that's a good example of like hunting a scenario, what that means, because what you're describing there, that spot was probably really good that year, and the next year that exact spot it probably wasn't the same.
No, it hasn't been like that since. That was probably 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
It hasn't been that way since.
And that's where the woodsmanship comes in too, where you're spending a lot of time in the woods. You know how to read the woods, and when you're out there, you know what you're looking at, and you know how to capitalize on it. And there's almost like a little bit of an intangible part of that, where it's like, I don't know if you can really explain that where someone could understand it. Like they just have to go out there and develop their own woodsmanship. I mean, would you agree?
Yeah, you do. And I'll tell you, there's no shortcuts when it comes to, and that's pretty much with everything in life, really. There's no shortcuts. There's nothing that beats getting out there and doing the work and the experience. Because I can't tell you how many years I messed up on so many deer, from just different things. But every one of those, you instead of being sad about it, you got to look at it as a learning experience. Like I said, I could name 1,000 scenarios where I did something stupid, but I finally learned. A lot of times I did it stupid 3 or 4 times, but I finally did learn it. But there's no exception. There's no nothing you can do that takes the place of the work and the experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then some people also have more of an innate grasp. Some people maybe can just go in and just kind of get a feeling. Some of the super hunters that are around, there's probably something they may have, like maybe call it a sixth sense, if you will, that other people don't have.
Yeah.
And also when you're hunting, when you start, if you're using trail cameras and maybe you're narrowing it down to actually hunting individual bucks, a lot of times learning that buck, he may do things totally different than the other deer in the area. I've seen that lots of times. Lots of times.
Yeah. That's the other thing too, is just bow hunting in the mountains, not only trying to narrow down where the deer are at, where they even are, but trying to get them within 30 yards for a
and 30 yards, by the way, that's my limit. I don't shoot far. I usually shoot my animals at 10, 15 yards. That's what I strive for. I want to make good, clean kills, and I want them to go down quick. And like I say, not to be arrogant, but you can watch my videos. All my animals I'm retrieving them pretty quick. Sometimes, matter of fact, I've been very fortunate. I've watched probably the last, 10 to 15 years. I've watched most of the deer or bear I shot die or heard them go down, close. Mm-hmm. But that's because I'm really picky about shooting a bow. I know long range is a big thing now. A lot of people are doing it. 30 yards. Yeah. And that's a long shot. I really don't want 30. I'd rather have it less than 20.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because I think that's another huge challenge that people have is not only is the landscape really big, but also a lot of it's big open hardwoods. You do have laurel thickets and everything, but it is a big wood setting. So what are you doing to be able to get deer so close to you consistently with a bow and arrow?
Well, so most of the time I'm hunting really close to the edge of the thickets. Okay, so what I'm hoping for is to catch the deer coming out or going in. Okay, and I'm hoping I've been able to determine trails they're using. And what I try to do is get a spot where I can get 2 or more trails within bow range. Okay, that's the ideal situation. And then of course I determine if those trails are any good with my trail cameras. Which, when again, trail cameras have been for me, that's probably been the number one tool that has improved my hunting over the years. Because I got into it when they first came out, back when they had film cameras. Yeah, talk about a pain in the butt. Take the film out, had to go to the drugstore and leave it, and had to pay for all the pictures, even though half of them would be dark, you know. And then when digital came out, my first digital camera was a Moultrie, and it was about the size of a shoebox. It used D batteries, 8 of them. Okay, so it was huge, and it was so slow. The trigger speed was so slow that, like, if a deer would walk this way, you wouldn't get a picture. He would already be gone before it triggered it. Just to give you a little history on that. And it's so much better now. But yeah, to get close, like I say, I'm going to try to determine trails they're using, coming in and out of the thickets, and I'm going to try to maybe validate that with trail cameras, and then trial and error. I'm going to get in the stand and I'm going to see what happens. And I'm not going to kid you. I move stands a lot. I mean, it's just not at all unusual for me to have to move. And a lot of times it's a little move. A lot of times it's just 20 yards. That's all you need. But, if I consistently watch this deer going in the mornings over here a little too far, and I'll wait until he's gone. In the middle of the day, I'll jump down and put the stand over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one challenge that I could see hunting in these mountains is anytime we've ever hunted any kind of setting like this, you get those big laurel thickets that deer are hanging out in. It's a lot like, in a way, hunting around pine thickets or clear cuts around where we're from in Bama, where it's this big thicket. There's a bunch of deer using it, but there's like 50 different trails that they might use to get in and out of that thing. Yeah. They can enter and exit it really wherever they want. And you mentioned earlier that you've wasted a lot of time chasing buck sign because a lot of it's made at night. So for you, it's just, are you just trying to find the heaviest, most beat down trail coming out of that laurel thicket and then throw a camera on it and see what's going on, or what?
Yep. And the thing with that, though, is in the mountains, you don't see trails like that very often where they're really beat down. Like, it's very common on a side of a ridge. Deer will walk around a ridge like this on the side. It's not at all unusual to have a trail every 50 yards down that ridge. Here's one here and here's one here.
Almost like topo lines.
Yeah. And you're like, which one? And they'll all look about the same, like they're being used about the same. That's where the cameras come in. And matter of fact, going back to my early days, something that's really archaic, I used to take thread and tie thread across trails and then come back a day or two and see if it was broke. Because I didn't, there was no other way. It's for trail cameras. And then you didn't know what kind of deer it was, or even if it was a deer. Could have been could have been a bear, could have been something else. But that was how I started trying to determine which trails are being used. Of course, the cameras make that so much easier. But it's very rare that I find a trail that's just tore up. And another thing, a lot of times the same group of deer don't always come out on the same trail every day. I've seen days, and here's a little example, just something I happened to notice last year. We had a drought last year. It was hot, very hot, no rain. Matter of fact, I saw creeks that have had water in them for the last 40 years go dry. But last year I would notice sometimes the deer would come out of the thickets instead of coming across this trail where I was hoping or inspecting. They went down because there was a water source. And I think they were hot and they left in their bed and went down to get water first. And then by the time they worked their way around, it was dark. It was too late. I didn't see them anymore. And that was just a guess I made, but that's what I think they were doing. Mm-hmm. Because down there, it was basically a dry creek, but there was a spot where it had formed a pool, and there was still maybe 2 inches of water in there. And there were tracks around that like crazy. And the problem was I didn't really try to hunt it. It was down in a ravine and almost impossible to beat the scent. It gets in there and just hangs around, Yeah. And every time I've tried to hunt those ravines, I usually get busted.
We grew up hunting trails in Alabama. My mentor, Ben George, that was his big thing. He would always want to hunt trails. And there was this mountain we hunted just south of Birmingham called Shades Mountain. We had some property down there. It's nothing like these mountains at all. But you would find trails just like what you're talking about. On the very top of that mountain, there's a thicket. And then going down the face, you'd find a trail. And then you go down 50 feet, find a trail. And I would ask Benny about it when I was a kid. And he'd be like, oh, they don't start using that trail till November. Or, oh, they only use that trail at night. And he like knew all these trails.
Oh, wow.
And so I was wondering if you found.
No, I'm not that good. No, if I knew that, I'd have a whole bunch more bucks on the wall. No, I have to go by trial and error. Other than like I was saying about with the water, where those deer were coming out instead of using this trail coming towards my stand, they angled down the ridge. They used that. I think that was because of the water situation. That was a unique situation for that season. But no, I can't really say that I could. I can't really say that I'm good enough that I could pick the trail and the season he's using it. No.
So when you're talking about exit trails and entrance trails into these laurel thickets, are you mostly focusing on trails coming in at a certain side elevation? Like they're not necessarily dropping or coming out of the top of the laurel thicket if it's on the side of the ridge?
Yeah,
or coming out of the bottom, it's more so out of the sides?
Yeah, they tend to walk, and I think it's just because they take the path of least resistance. It's a lot harder to walk straight up or straight down, so they'll angle. Yeah, they'll usually angle. And that's also where terrain features come in. A lot of times, if you have a saddle or like say a bench or the change, like a lot of times the ridge will be real steep, but they'll have another finger ridge off of it that's not as steep. They'll travel that to end up in the same destination, but an easier way. Okay, so you got to kind of look at that, yeah. But very rarely do I see one go straight up or straight down, unless he's scared and he's running from something, you know.
Now, while we're talking about bow hunting, and we're kind of on the topics of trails, how do you typically try to set your stands up in some of those spots? Like if you get evidence from trail cameras or based off sign that you think there's a buck coming through here and you're trying to kill a buck, you know, before gun season or muzzleloader season opens here in November, how are you trying to position a stand? You said you like to be close. You want to be close to the thicket. But are you typically trying to be just below the trail and climbing up? Are you dropping down lower in elevation, shooting eye level? Are you getting above the trail? How do you like to position yourself?
That's a wide open question. There's so many scenario variations there. So first thing, if I determine a spot that I think maybe I can get a shot, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to pick 2 or 3 stand trees because of wind. Okay. Now, you know, typically in most areas you have wind that's kind of normal wind for an area, but that can change any day, right? With storms and fronts and things. So, I'm going to try to plan to have a place where I can hunt, where I know my wind's not going in that bedding area and scaring the deer in the evening, and then in the mornings when they're coming in, I don't want it blowing down to where I think they're coming from. So that's the first thing I'm going to consider is getting enough spots to try to beat the wind if possible. Now in the mountains, I will say this: beating the wind's probably a bad way to say it, because you're never going to beat it. It changes, thermals change, weather changes. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a stand, been there an hour, and then the wind change. You know, but as far as hunting below or above the trail, in steep land, you really got to be careful with that. And the buck I mentioned earlier, as a matter of fact, is a good example. When he came and approached over my left shoulder, I was expecting him here at 12 yards, but I was way above him because of the steepness of the land. When he came right here, he was eye level with me. Okay, so if possible, I try to be above the trail just for that reason. If I have to be below the trail, I'm going to try to pick a tree that's got some cover, especially what I really like is if I can find like 3 trees together, something like that, or at least a tree with another one growing in front of it with some leaves on it, to get hidden, because elevation, it really changes the way you hunt, and especially if the animal's way above you on the ridge, he's actually looking down on you. And if you get caught moving, and one of the little things I do for that, I carry camo netting. It's real light. It's 4 foot by 12 foot long, and it doesn't weigh but a few ounces. I stuff it in my pack. A lot of times when I set up a tree stand, if I have an area above me I'm worried about a deer, I'll string that netting up I have some clothespins, and you figure out ways to hook. You can hook it on a limb, this and that. But a lot of times, I'll have that actually above my head when I'm sitting in the stand, so that if I get frigidity, a deer up there sneaks in on me, that hides me. And that's a little trick I do that helps a lot.
Interesting. Now, also, bow hunting the mountains. Again, that's I'm sure we're going to talk some gun and muzzleloader hunting here in a little bit, but I do want to stay on bow hunting. The one thing that you mentioned earlier when we were eating lunch and hanging out for a little bit was a term that we call feed trees, but hunting oaks that are dropping in early season or during bow season. And you've had a lot of success killing deer around that. And we rarely find guys. We've had maybe a handful of guys out of 700 something episodes that hunt mountains that have had success hunting around feed, specifically mass. What is your strategy there? I know you mentioned earlier that you like to, if you can focus on where there's doe activity, there's going to be bucks there. But even during like mid bow season, like maybe mid-October, getting into late October time frame, how is your approach with that and finding mass and setting up in around feed sign in the mountains?
Well, the mass can be changing a lot during October. Depending on the season, and I don't know all the science behind it, but depending on, I think, how wet it was or dry it was, acorns will drop at different times, and even sometimes acorns in the same mountain range will drop at different times due to elevation, which I think maybe they mature quicker at one elevation than they do another. So it pays to really pay attention. I can tell you a really good example of that was my bow buck last year. I was hunting a spot on the side of a ridge, had a laurel bedding area on both sides, and I was hunting it. I hadn't seen anything. I hunted maybe 3-4 days there, and while I was there, the last day that I hunted the spot, behind me, it got real windy, and behind me up the ridge, maybe 200 more yards higher up the ridge, I could hear acorns raining down like crazy. I mean, it was sounding like hail, and the wind had dislodged them. They were ready to fall, but the wind, and I'm like, that's crazy, because the same thing wasn't happening right here where I was at. I moved my stand 200 yards up that ridge and killed the buck the next morning, and he was just ambling through feeding. He just came through feeding. But that's a good example of paying attention to the changing food supplies, and that's kind of maybe that's a little unusual, but it pays to be aware of where your acorns are at any given time during the season, because they will change. And that's another thing is the white oaks will get gobbled up quick. You may go in there and find some white oaks, and then you don't get to hunt for a couple weeks and come back, and guess what? Your stand's dead because they're gone. Now they're somewhere else, And I've seen that happen a lot. When if you have limited white oaks, once they find them, they're gonna eat them up. They're going to go for them. And that's one reason the red oaks actually come in handy later, because even though they don't like them as much, they do last longer. They have a higher tannin content, and they last longer. Of course, they don't taste as good because of that tannin. But, when there's nothing else to eat, the deer are glad to get them.
So also when you're trying to hunt a buck on feed sign, specifically oaks that are dropping, are you trying to, I want to know a couple different things, which we'll go through this from a setup position, like how you're picking a spot, but also how are you determining one spot has a higher odds of a buck coming through than another spot? Are you looking for sign? Are you looking for, just a ton of feed sign, rubs, scrapes? What do you kind of keep on?
Sign, of course, is important, but like back to the trail cameras again. A lot of it's going to be based on what I'm seeing with the cameras. And see, I run a lot of cameras. I might have 4 or 5, in an area, and that's going to tell me a whole lot, the cameras. But also the sign, where I see a lot of droppings, if you see a lot of droppings, they're spending a lot of time there, right? Because if you see a lot, then obviously they're staying there eating and pooping. Mm-hmm. So that's one of my favorite signs to see is I see a lot of fresh droppings, and also, of course, you can see where they shuffle the leaves. A lot of times it looks like a tiller has been through there when it's a real good white oak crop.
Okay, interesting. And then also, you said you put cameras on there. What's your camera strategy for around feed trees? Because we've heard of a couple guys doing it with mixed results, but
around what?
Feed trees, oaks that are dropping.
Okay.
What's your trail camera strategy in a spot like that when you're trying to get inventory of what's using it?
Well, obviously they're coming in from some direction, right? So what I'm going to try to do is, like, if it's a big wide area with acorns, they could be anywhere in there, right? So what I'm going to try to do is set the camera up, hopefully where I think they're coming in, and catch them coming in that way. Yeah. And speaking of cameras, another thing I like to do is on the camera. I learned, took me a while, but I started noticing that some deer see that camera and pick up on it. I can't tell you the amount of deer I've had that had big eyes, looking at it, and I know they saw it. I've started positioning my cameras up like this, up high and angled down. Now, you don't get as good a distance because, you're angled, but I've noticed that I'm getting a lot less deer noticing the camera that way. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good piece of advice. We do that some for deer, but all, especially like on scrapes, because they're spending so much time on a scrape.
Yeah.
And like, it always seems like if you put it low, they're like messing with it, looking where they look over right at it, and like,
And around here, another thing is bears. If a bear sees a camera, he'll tear it up sometimes. They go. That's another whole topic, but it drives me crazy. I don't know what it is, but they will tear a camera up. Have y'all experienced that?
not where we're at.
Oh,
But-
you talk to anybody who hunts here. Jim Forbes will tell you he's had a bunch of them torn up by bears.
Yeah.
Yeah. We none of us really know why. It's I don't know if it's they smell something or what, but they'll attack them.
Yeah.
Some of them will slap it around a little bit and knock it sideways, and that's it. Some of them will actually attack it and destroy it. Yeah, it's crazy.
So also, when you're hunting, again, feed in the mountains, and like you mentioned this earlier, but like it could be at different elevations those oaks are dropping or has acorns that they produce that year. Be on ridge tops, could be on flats, could be on benches, could be high, could be low, anywhere in between. What is your hunting strategy? Does it change anything different from how you're hunting those bedding areas to how you're hunting the feeding areas? And again, kind of setting up where you're going to get a closer shot if there's say a certain elevation that's got a lot of feed on it.
Well, yeah. So, if the acorn, if the feeding area changes, let's say there's not as many here now, the white oaks are gone, they're over here, the deer will actually alter their bedding too. So if you might have to do a little bit of new research and kind of figure out, are the deer still bedding where they were, especially if it's a long ways. And in mountains, it's not unusual at all for deer to move miles. I've actually gotten deer on game camera 3 miles apart. At one year in particular, it was really neat. I had basically it was a triangle setup. I had 2 cameras and a camera here, 3 cameras, and I had one deer, and as a matter of fact, I named him the Wanderer. He was a 10-point. I never got him, never saw him in person, and he probably died of old age. But he would show up on all those cameras, and sometimes in the same day. He was traveling miles. Now, that was during a rut. He was searching for does, But anyway, back to the original topic. If the food changes a little bit, you may have to look at your bedding. Is there a bedding area near there where maybe they're changing their bedding a little bit? Because, a deer is not tied to a spot. I mean, he doesn't have to go to that exact spot every day. So yeah, it's trial and error. And once again, I'm fortunate that I have a lot of time to hunt. A lot of what I do is just sheer observation, learning from what I see,
How's that changed, especially bow hunting, from when you had your career before you retired to after you retired? Because now you have a lot more time to spend out there.
Yeah.
But before you were retired, how often did you get a hunt, and then did that change your?
I still hunted a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. So I worked for 20 some years for a manufacturing company, and I was very fortunate. And this is one of the reasons I took the job. I worked a 3-day-a-week schedule, 3 12s. Sometimes you had to work overtime, but I worked 3 12s, and I ended up with, I had 5 weeks vacation. So I managed to take between my vacation and the 4 days a week off, I still managed to hunt a lot. Yeah. Most of the time I would be off for like the whole month of November, just about, because you had Thanksgiving in there too, so I already had some time there. So I would manipulate my hours and days, and I remember one year I tried something different. During bow season, I took off every day at noon. Took like a few hours of vacation, split it up, and went to work. Worked half a day and took off every day at noon and hunted only afternoons. that year just to try it out. But I was able to hunt every day of the season. And so I was very blessed that I had, first of all, I was very blessed that my wife puts up with it. She's great. She's amazing. And I'm very thankful that she understands my obsession and hadn't had me committed yet. And, but I, like I say, I was just very fortunate I had a job where I could do it. You know, and I know a lot of guys, that's the problem for a lot of guys try to hunt national forest and working 5 days a week. You only got Saturday, or it's tough. It's really tough, you know. And you know, I mean, in that situation there, you're going to need some luck if you don't have much time, because it does take a lot of time.
What would you say is like, because I know you film all your hunts on your YouTube channel and you're trying to like educate people that don't have the experience and share information with them. What's like some of your biggest pieces of advice for someone trying to get into bow hunting or take bow hunting more seriously on the national forest? What are the handful of factors they need to be paying attention to in order to try to have that success in the mountains?
Well, the first thing I would say to somebody, if you're just learning, you've never been there, whatever you do, get out right after season in January and scout like crazy, because in January all the foliage is gone. You can see rub will show like a white beacon in the woods, on the side of a cedar tree or something. Get in there and walk, hike, do whatever you got to do every hour you can, and figure out what you can from a late season scouting trip, because what you see there happened during deer season, right? The droppings, the trails, the rubs, the scrapes. That would be my first piece of advice. Find that. And now that you've determined an area that there's some bucks, there's some sign, then you're going to have to start for your next season. You're going to have to start going in there whenever you can and find the food, find it where the food is that year, by looking for the acorns. I've harped on acorns a lot, but I should have mentioned also there's a lot of places that deer browse. A deer eats so many different plants. It's amazing, right? And that's another thing I'll watch. And matter of fact, I've got a scouting video, where one summer, every deer I saw in the woods, I started filming it just to see what it was eating. It would be nibbling, and I'd go back later and blow it up and try to figure out what that plant was. And it's amazing. But acorns are important, but there's also other plants that you can focus on. Our deer in these mountains, if you find areas where there's little small maples, small oak, like they love young sapling trees, they'll just gobble those leaves up like crazy. And that's another thing. There are places in the national forest where they've done some cutting. They need to do a lot more to create better habitat. But anytime I find a place where they've done some cutting, usually the second year after that, it's grown up in all kinds of vegetation. That's a great place if you don't know where to go. Focus on that in the early season. Matter of fact, 2 years ago, along a corridor that I hunt through the mountains up here, and they did controlled burning, and they went for miles, and they burnt all the undergrowth off, and it has grown up now in a lot of new vegetation. And I ride the bike through there a lot of times, and I see deer every time I go. They're always feeding in there. So that's another place you could look. If you didn't know where to go, that'd be something you could target. But again, you got to get out and find those spots, because they're not advertised, and they may not always show up on like Onyx, because it may have just happened this year or last year, and a lot of times they don't update, real quick on some of those. I noticed one Onyx I was looking at just recently, it didn't have a feature that's there now that wasn't there before, and where they had cut. So
We need to show you the recent aerial imagery on Onyx, where you can see those fresh cuts from 2 weeks ago.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, I got to figure that out.
We'll show
it to you after.
Oh, okay.
We'll show you after the podcast, because that's real helpful for finding those fresh cuts.
Because I was just doing this. I was just looking probably a couple weeks ago, and this one area doesn't look like it does now on my Onyx. So that's good. You can show me that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, is Andrew? Do you have any other questions on bow hunting? Because I do want to get to terrain features and muzzleloader rut hunting and gun season here. Because I think that's something that not only we've got interest in all of it, but I'd love to know a lot of your strategy there. Swapping, putting the bow down, pick up the muzzleloader or the rifle. But do you have anything else on archery?
I want to talk about terrain features.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Because I was thinking terrain features, especially during that pre-rut, rut time frame, and all that kind of stuff. You mentioned that older guy that you met years ago, who he would find a terrain feature sound like a saddle or something he'd like to sit on. He sit it the whole firearm season, I'm guessing, or muzzle season, killing a buck.
He only gun hunted. He would sit there the whole time.
So
Yeah.
walk us through again, maybe a little bit more of getting into that later October time frame when muzzler season opens. Start getting some activity of bucks starting to look to seek for does, and then transition to the gun season in November. What is your thought process there? What changes, but what stays the same, especially when it comes to the topographical features you focus on?
Well, okay, so once we transition from bow hunting, of course, now we have a weapon that can shoot a lot farther, right? So we don't have to be near as picky with our situation where we're going to sit and watch, because we can shoot 100 yards, which I usually don't. Most of the woods I hunt, I really can't really get a shot much over 50, 60. Every now and then you might get a little longer shot, but I still hunt pretty close. But there are pieces of woods that are open, and I will mention something about that. I notice when I'm in the national forest, I find other people's stands and blinds. Most hunters gravitate to a spot where they can see. And I think it's because they're like, the more real estate I can see, the more chance I got seeing a deer, right? But I noticed very rarely do those deer just walk through those huge, vast open spots in the daytime. They still like those edges and some cover. Like, my favorite areas are pieces of woodland that are interspersed with laurel, like little patches of laurel. They love those because they can kind of go from this one to that one, and they're kind of staying hidden. And I really like those. But features. So, and there's so many different things in the mountains we could talk about as far as features, but I'll talk first about saddles. Okay, so a saddle is basically what it sounds like. It looks like this, and it usually will connect. Here's a ridge, and that saddle will connect a ridge. So if that buck's traveling, checking the doe bedding areas, or just scent checking for does in general, he can travel over those ridges, hit those saddles, and that's like the path of least resistance. And he can go ridge to ridge to ridge. Okay, and again, I think a lot of it has to do with the least amount of effort. He's walking along, and there's no sense in going straight up and straight down if I can take this little cut through. Okay, and then the benches. The benches are great travel corridors, and sometimes benches will run a long ways in the mountains on the ridges, like hundreds of yards. Okay, and that's also a great walkway for them. Flats. I love flats. A lot of times flats, and I'm assuming that a lot of times the acorns are better there in flats and even browse, and I'm assuming that it's probably because of runoff. Natural fertilizers in the soil, rotting things. But the runoff, I think, creates a more fertile place. And a lot of times you'll find a lot of vegetation around flats.
How would you describe what a flat looks like in the mountains?
It's the only flat spot you see.
But is it in the bottom? Is it kind of up on the ridge?
No, but it could be. You on a top of a ridge, I would call it like a plateau. But it's sort of the same thing. Yeah, you'll see flats on top too. And we'll talk about that in just a minute too. But the flats in the bottom, like ridges come down. A lot of times, I got like one place I really like is 3 ridges come down like this, and there's a flat, and you can always see deer on that flat. But you have to be careful with the wind. Now with a rifle, not a problem. You just get back on one of the ridges, and like I've taken several deer there. But that flat always has a lot of vegetation, and a lot of times you'll have good acorn production there. Now, on top of ridges, you'll occasionally get flats, and you can see these. I wish I had a topo map to show you, but a lot of times on a topo map, you find a nice flat on top. That can, one thing, be a good bedding area, because it's over the top. The deer can scent, check one way, and look like we talked about earlier, and look the other way. But that's also a good place for a buck to roam the edge of the flat, looking down or scent checking from down below. So that's some of like my favorite places. But then there's other things that are subtle, that are kind of hard to describe. Like sometimes a ridge will be real steep. It'll come down steep, and then maybe it'll kind of even out a little bit. And a lot of times at that transition, that deer like to walk that because I don't exactly know why, but a lot of times you'll see a trail there where a deer will walk that. And then also when we start talking about getting into muzzleloader and bow seasons, now we're not so much worried about certain trails because now bucks are roaming, right? So now a trail that he used, he might not be using that much now because now he's roaming and using the features to travel his home range, or even outside of his home range for that matter, to find does. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah,
or?
absolutely. And I want to go even further into it, but I'm going to let Andrew roll with it because this is up. I mean, I love terrain features. Andrew nerds out to
Yeah.
the utmost, extreme. But like when it comes to those terrain features, Andrew, I want to give you a quote. I want you to talk for a second. I want to see what you've got for.
You can keep going.
Okay.
Well, I didn't mention there's another thing, a bowl, and it's a bowl is just what it sounds like. Sometimes you'll have two ridges that maybe curve around like this, maybe connected with a saddle right here, and there'll be a bowl. And I love those. I love those spots.
Do typically some of your bowls have multiple drainages, kind of drop like small
They
drainages?
can,
drop
yeah,
into
yeah. But it's hard to bow hunt something like that because the bowl, the wind is, you never know what the wind's doing.
Yeah.
And if you think the wind in the mountains isn't crazy, I think one of the first times it hit me so hard, I was in a stand and I had a thread.
Mm-hmm.
I always have a thread hanging. I just like glance and watch it, and I had a thread and the wind was going like this. And 40 yards below me, the wind was going the other way. Yeah. And what it was doing, it was swirling. Yeah, where it was swirling in a hollow and coming around. And I had deer blow at me several times. And I figured out why. But just that, here's wind going one direction here, 40 yards away, it's going that way. Just goes to show you how tricky wind is. But any time in the mountains you get down in hollows or in bowls, you're playing with fire. Yeah, but that's like I say, that's the beauty of a longer range weapon. You can get back up away from that.
What is it on the ground that tells you that one terrain feature is better than another one? Because again, I go back to kind of earlier in the conversation, you were saying that buck sign can be kind of misleading because a lot of it's done at night. So what tells you that this saddle is good?
Okay, so now when I get to that point of the season and I'm hunting that terrain, I'm hoping to catch that roaming buck. One of my favorite things would be to see rubs. Because, a roaming buck's going to stop and make a rub, okay? And of course, you can tell, if the trail's been shuffled. It may not be a lot of dropping, so he's not really stopping much. But, if the trail looks like it's been used, and by that point of the season, you've got new leaves falling out of the trees, so it's pretty easy to see when the leaves are moved. Earlier, you can't really tell as much. But I like to see rubs then. Rubs tell me a lot.
Does terrain features adjacent to or either has bedding adjacent to it or bedding in that terrain feature, does that play more of a factor for you too versus like more open wood terrain feature?
Well, that could be an ideal situation. If you had a bedding area that was near a good terrain feature, that'd be a bonus. Yeah. And like one of the places, matter of fact, I killed a really, really nice buck the year before last, and it's a spot exactly like that. A bedding area that I've been hunting all during bow season and didn't kill a deer there. But there was a lot of deer using it. I knew they were using it. And I didn't kill a deer there. And he came in on a saddle over here that connected the ridge to that bedding area. And I'd never seen that buck before. He was roaming. Yeah. And so that would be a good example of that terrain feature brought that deer there.
Yeah.
And it just so happened to be close to that particular bedding area.
I bring that up just because our buddy Devin Duncan, who lives up here.
Yeah, Devin's a good guy, great hunter too. Yeah.
Well, he hunts the National Forest, and he's talked about before in the episode, like he loves in certain spots where he can find a big saddle that's got laurel on both sides of the saddle. On the faces of the saddle, and it's kind of open in the middle, but they're cutting across through that saddle, going from one laurel thicket to the next laurel thicket. And he's like, those are phenomenal spots if you can find that scenario in the mountains. And
on that same topic, I love those transition spots between laurels, even if it's not a good terrain feature, even if it's just somewhere, anywhere. Anytime you can get a gap in between a laurel, that's an excellent place for a deer to try to jump across because, he likes being in that cover. And he may circle around and stay out of open woods just to get to that laurel thicket where he knows he can cut across quick, and not be seen. Yeah, so I'm the same way. I love openings and laurel. Matter of fact, a lot of the stands that I put up, I a lot of times put my stand up in the laurel a little ways. I love little pockets in the laurel. And maybe I can't see as far, but those deer are so comfortable in there. And a lot of times, like especially like an afternoon, a deer may get up. He may get out of his bed. He may get out of his bed 2-3 hours before dark, but not really work his way out into the open till after dark. And you might spot him kind of sneaking around in those little openings, nibbling here and there because he feels safe in there.
Now, I wanted to figure out how you hunt some of these terrain features, like from a setup standpoint. And again, they're all a little bit different, but like typically in a saddle, if you find a saddle that piques your interest based off sign, like rubs, got cover adjacent to it, if not in it, mountain laurel and so on. How do you like to position yourself hunting a saddle?
Well, first, number one's going to be the wind. That's the first thing. Where's the wind going? And so once I determine that for that day, and of course that can change, but then what I'd like to do is where the two ridges are connected with the saddle. Of course, I don't want to be in the saddle. I'd like to be either here or here, looking down into it, or if it's offers itself, if there's another ridge over here looking at the saddle, that's even better. Okay, but you don't find that situation all the time, right? So the problem with sitting here and here, though, you got to be careful. You got to make sure you're going to get off that main trail or whatever that runs through. Usually it's only one trail on the saddle because saddles aren't normally real wide. So there's probably going to be one main trail. And getting off of it can be difficult. But I still use tree stands even with rifle and gun. That's where a tree stand can really help because you can get off of it and still get high enough to, see down in there. But most of the time I'm going to be on one point or the other.
Okay.
But ideally, if I can, like I said, I do have this one spot that I really, really like that has a ridge that comes down like this into a bowl, to a saddle, and I can sit over here and it's like 60 yards to the saddle. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, and then how do you hunt a bench? If you find a bench that's got good access?
Try to get above it. Again, wind. If you have morning thermals, or evening thermals, as the earth cools and warms, everybody knows that situation. You have to watch out, but I love to get above them if I can. That's your ideal situation. And matter of fact, one spot I really, really love, it's a real sharp ridge, goes down like this to a point, and the bench goes all the way around it. And I can position during rifle season on the middle of it and top, and I can have opportunity to shoot all the way around the tip of it, if the wind allows. Yeah. See, the problem with hunting the bench from below is if you're especially if you're on the ground, you're looking up. Depending on how wide the bench is, that deer could be over in there and you can see him. One year, it drove me crazy. I was sneaking, and I love to still. We talk about stand hunting, but I love still hunting when the conditions are right, which mainly wet. But one year, it drove me crazy. It was during muzzleloader season. It was drizzling rain, middle of the day. And I'm sneaking up this ridge, and there's a bench right there, and I see this rack. And that's all I can see. He's over on that bench, and all I can see is those antlers sticking up walking. And I'm having a fit. And I'm looking through the scope and hoping to see him, and he keeps going around. And I try to circle around and get ahead of him, and then I never see him again. So, but yeah, bench from above if you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
How often are you trying to find those, like a compounding terrain feature where two or three different terrain features like what you're talking about, maybe like a bench that runs through a saddle or runs into a saddle or whatever? How often are you trying to put two or three of them together?
Well, ideally, that would be great if I could find those. They're kind of rare. Situations like that's rare. One spot that comes to mind, 4 ridges come straight down off a mountain, and there's 2 saddles that are actually in range of a gun, either one of them. That's a perfect spot, okay? But there's not many of those out there. That's where you're mapping, looking at your maps and studying your maps. But yeah, that's pretty difficult to find where you have a lot of them coming together, or more than one coming together to make a plan, where you can shoot at either one. Mm-hmm. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that does. And by the way, you brought up Devin a minute ago, he brought up Devin talking about trying to find those terrain features or like a saddle that has laurel on both sides of it. Devin told me that years ago, and I went and applied that in Alabama.
Yeah.
Some of the places we hunt, and man, does that work!
Yeah.
I mean, it works.
Yeah.
One of our better spots sets up like that. It's actually a flat, and on both sides of the flat, like where it falls off and starts going down the mountain, there's real thick mountain laurel, and the deer just cut across.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Especially during the rut, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
yeah, definitely. And there's scrapes all over it. Now you mentioned that that a lot of scrapes, like you've hunted scrapes in the past and haven't had much luck. What's been your experience with scrapes in the mountains?
Man, scrapes drive me crazy. Okay? I can remember years ago, the very first one I ever found, I was all excited. And I hunted and hunted and never saw a deer there. So, I've learned more about scrapes as I've gotten older, and especially these last few years. I've actually picked up a little bit more knowledge, which I'm kind of late in life to be getting it. You know, by the time I finally learn everything, I'm going to be too old to get out there. But anyway, the scrapes, so many of them don't mean anything, is what I'm seeing. And again, back to trail cameras. I can't tell you how many times I put a trail camera on a scrape, and I'd see more does there than I would bucks. And sometimes never see a deer. I think sometimes a buck's just walking around, he's frustrated, he's all hyped up on testosterone, he just decides to make a scrape, right? But what I've started noticing is everything has to be perfect. When I mean perfect, the perfect licking branch, okay? And that's something I used to not pay attention to as much, the perfect licking branch. And also, what I've noticed, a lot of times if there's a good scrape that's actually being worked, there'll be more than one. The place that I got a really good video, you have to go watch it, of a scrape last year. It was one of the best scrapes I ever found. It was three scrapes. And this big dogwood tree had these branches that came out and had multiple licking branches. They were the perfect height. And there was deer there. In fact, matter of fact, a monster buck showed up there that I never saw. I'm gonna hope he's still alive. I'm gonna try for him this year. But 5 or 6 different bucks hit that scrape frequently. But it was 3 scrapes. Mm-hmm. But so I guess to answer your question, look for one that's really getting hit a lot but fresh. If they're really using it, you're gonna know it. You know, and and a good way to tell, just take I don't want to use my something to put human scent down, but grab a stick, kick some leaves and stuff over it. If it's not uncovered in a couple of days, he's not using it, right? Because if he's really using it, or if multiple bucks are using it, which is what I've found, usually it's not just one buck, it's usually several. They're going to clean it out. Mm. Yeah.
We were just talking to another guy about that, big wood scrapes.
Yeah.
He was saying the
They're
same
tough.
thing. Yeah, well, he was saying the same thing about, if there's a buck in there and he's really using that scrape, he doesn't want there to be leaves in it. So if you got, like if it's in November and your leaves are really starting to fall and it gets covered up, odds are he's going to want to come run that scrape. I'm like, man, I've never thought about that.
Yeah, well, like I said, I do. I cover them up on purpose. Just take, like I said, grab a stick and that one last year was a really good. Actually, I had 2. And a very rare occurrence, I actually watched 3 bucks last year in muzzleloader season. One morning, I watched 3 bucks visit a scrape. I videoed all of them, and they all worked it. I watched them work it. Yeah, the whole deal. The licking branch, peeing in it, pawing it, the whole 9 yards.
None of them shooters?
No. The 6-point, there was a 6-pointer that was beautiful. If he lived, he's going to be something. Matter of fact, if I'd been bow hunting and I had all my tags, I would have shot him. Okay, if I'd have run into him, but I let him go. But I got a video of it. He's a beautiful 6-pointer, real long tines, kind of skinny, and he had features of a younger deer. I think he was only 2.5, but he's gonna be something. But no, they weren't shooters. No. Then there was a basket rack 8, that's 6, and then a little 4. But all 3 of them hit the scrape and worked it. And it was also interesting to watch the 4-pointer. He was very nervous of the other 2 bucks. He knew they were, bigger than him, I guess, or they were in the pecking order. He knew he didn't belong. He was very, very cautious. He kind of circled the scrape and looked and looked. He was really, really sneaky about getting in there. Yeah, that's just one of the little things too that about back to observation. Pay attention. The deer, the animals will tell you a lot if you listen. If you just watch. That was a good example right there. Just say that I had been hunting that area and walked up on that little buck right there. If I paid attention to his body language, it might be a clue that there's a bigger buck around, So, but yeah, last year was really, really good. That's one of the first times I got to see that that in the daytime, and then I had the other place with the camera on where the bucks were hitting it, including that giant.
I was going to ask about that spot where you were saying earlier, you're like, man, this one scrape is cool because I'm actually getting daylight bucks on it.
Yeah.
What's so different about that one? Is it right up against a bedding area or something?
It was actually, it was in the bedding area, right in a trail went right down through the bedding area. It was in the bedding area, probably 30 yards from the open woods. Yeah. And speaking of that, well, I didn't say it enough. I might have mentioned it, but edge. When you talk about features, edges, any kind of edges. I love edges, whether it be the edges of the laurels, or edges where pine forest joins the hardwood, or any kind of thick area. Deer just, and everybody I think knows this. Deer love edges, no matter where they're at, whether it be lowland or mountain land. But yeah, that scrape was just, like I say, 20 yards, 30 yards from the edge of the open woods. Yeah.
Is that a spot you can get up and shoot to and hunt?
Oh yeah. I hunted it. I hunted it hard. I just never, but I hunted it hard. But the scrape activity dropped off a lot when this is typical. Again, pay attention to what the woods are telling you. The scrape activity seems to be the best before peak rutting. Once peak rutting starts, it's not that important. The scrapes aren't as important, or seemingly so from what I've observed. And that's what happened. By the time I got in there hunting it, I think it was just a little too late. And I did see a couple bucks there, but nothing I wanted to shoot because I was on my last tag.
Speaking of that transition into rut, just out of curiosity, let's say that it's just middle of the rut, prime time, conditions are perfect. What's your ideal setup for that scenario?
Hunt near where does are, where I know a bunch of does are. Wherever I know the most does are, that's where I'm going to be. Yeah, that's what's good. That's to me my number one factor, because no matter what the land looks like around, if the does are there, he's coming.
I love that.
The tried and true method.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but I spent all these years trying to hunt bucks with buck sign, and then I finally realized that all I had to do was, hunt near the does during the rut, of course, and hunt where the does are.
Well, yeah, the reason I say I love that is because I spend a lot of time hunting in terrain, and I feel like sometimes where I go wrong is I go and hunt. This happened to me last year. I went to an area and camped for 5 days and just got beat. I've been complaining about it all the time on the podcast. People are probably tired about hearing about it, but I mean, like, it was bad. Like, hardly saw any deer in 5 days.
Yeah,
dark to dark. And I realize, looking back now, what I'm doing in those situations is I'm trying to hunt a terrain feature more than I'm hunting the deer. I'm like, oh, I found this big saddle. I need to hunt the saddle. But the deer just weren't there. They just weren't there.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. They had been there the previous 2 years. We had some really good hunts for 2 years. Then last year, I mean, it was just, I should have packed up and moved and went somewhere else, but I didn't. That's why I say, like, that's a really good piece of advice, actually, because I think myself right out of good spots all the time.
And listeners and viewers will ask questions about, like, oh man, I'm hunting the rut. I'm not really seeing much buck sign and all this kind of stuff. And it comes back to, if you just focus, if you truly know when the rut is, because especially down by us is a lot more variable. It's not as kind of hard dates that y'all might have up here. But if you know when the rut is and you're seeing some kind of rut activity, if you can just focus on does and bedding areas and where the does are spending time, like you said, the buck's coming. I mean, it's the best attractant that you don't have to buy, you don't have to put out. It is there naturally.
Yeah.
You just got to find the does.
And again, if you know where the does are and you have a good terrain feature, that's just a bonus, right? If the does are here in this bedding area and there's a good saddle, that's a good place to watch. But the does are the key. And I can't even tell you how many over the years, especially the last, 10, 15 years when I just really started doing that, where I didn't even worry about anything. I just hunted where does were. I just kept waiting. And a lot of times it's not easy. A lot of times it's days and days of waiting. I killed we have a late muzzleloader season here, by the way. After gun season goes out, in December, you can muzzleload hunt again, all the way up to the first Saturday of January. And you hear people talk about the so-called second rut, right? I don't think there's a whole lot of it, but there is some. And I actually learned this big time with this buck that I killed the year before last. I was hunting, wasn't seeing hardly anything. Matter of fact, I think I put one stretch in of like 7 days without seeing a deer at all. There was this one spot where there were still some acorns, and I'll go back to the acorns for a minute. Sometimes in the mountains, steep ridges, acorns will actually wash down into the bottom. Okay, from they'll tumble down, but they'll also rain, or but there'll be a concentration. And I found this little spot between two ridges. I'm at the head of the hollow, looking down the hollow, and I found this little spot where the deer had been frequently feeding, digging those acorns up. And the bedding area was behind me, so I think I just guessed that in the mornings they'll come up through here and eat a few acorns and go to bed. Well, sure enough, I hunted that spot, and I didn't see a whole lot of deer. But the morning I killed this buck, and I got it on video too, by the way. It was middle of December, and this doe came up by herself, just feeding along, and all of a sudden she starts looking over here. I'm like, oh, she sees something. Could have been a coyote, but I knew she saw something. Well, again, pay attention to what the deer are telling you. She starts looking. I look over through the woods where she's looking. I see these antlers coming. I'm like, oh boy. And this is late season. I got a tag. I'm not going to be real picky. If it's a decent buck, I'm taking it, right? It turned out to be a nice mature 8-pointer. But here he come. And she didn't want no part of him. Here he comes towards her. She bust out of there, and I got that on video. And he came down, started sniffing the ground where she was, and I took him right there. But that was a good example of just waiting for a doe, and that just happened to be just one doe, but that doe brought that buck in, and that was a second rut. And I've never really had a lot of faith in second rut. I don't think there's a lot of it goes on, but I think maybe. First of all, I don't think mature does go without getting bred. I think there's going to be a buck and a finder eventually during the rut. But maybe some of the younger ones come that have their first estrus cycle a little later, like maybe that's because this was a small deer. And so maybe you get some of it there. But
Interesting.
Do you implement calling at all during the rut?
That's a great question. I do some calling. But I'll be honest with you, I don't have a lot of success. Now, I use a grunt call, and I use the bleat, and I also rattle, okay? And, for example, grunt call is probably the most practical call of all, because bucks, deer grunt all the time, both sexes, right? I will be honest with you, 9 times out of 10 when if I grunt at a deer I can see, they usually ignore it. I don't know if you've experienced that or not, but their ear may switch, or they may look. Most times they ignore it. And I've even played with deer that I wasn't going to shoot. They were close, and just do all kinds of grunts and stuff. And I've had them just completely ignore it. It's crazy. But there have been a few times when the grunt made a big difference. I've seen. Usually, I like to use it if I see a deer out of range, and I have no hope of seeing him unless I try something. I'll try the grunt call, and I have had some turn and come, but I had more do this. Grunt, they acknowledge they heard it, and then maybe 15 minutes later, here they come, sneaking, to try to determine what deer they heard, okay? Bleats, I've probably had more fawns and does come to bleats than anything. I don't think I've ever called a buck in with a bleat. But now rattling, I like to rattle. I don't have much success at it, but every now and then you hit the right buck that's in the right mood. It can be great. But I do it very infrequently. Now during the rut, I'm always going to have my rattling horns with me, and let's say I get in a stand that morning. For the first 3-4 hours, I'm probably not going to do any rattling. But if things aren't happening, and I'll give it a shot, especially if I know there's a thick area around that maybe a buck could be in that I can't see, or maybe I heard some chasing or something going on. If I think there's a buck around, especially, I'll try some rattling. And I have brought a few deer in, but not many. Yeah, so I'm not real big on calling, to answer your question. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's a valuable tool in the right situations. I always have them. I'm always using them. But I haven't had a lot of success with calling.
Also, do you happen to know, is there any kind of data on the deer density per square mile in this area of the state?
It varies immensely from area to area. So now, as far as actual data, I can't tell you. Here's what I can tell you. In the national forest and the mountains, the deer density is extremely low. It's nothing to sit days and days without seeing a deer. But in the lowland, in the same county, you go to the farm, you see 50 deer a day. So that's the difference. It's all about the habitat. But I don't know if there's any formal data. Yeah, I don't think there is. But I mean, that's the only way I can really answer that question.
I just bring it up, whether there was data published that you knew or not. That's the commonality we hear with a lot of our Virginia guys that we've had on the podcast that hunt mountains is like super low deer numbers. Devin Duncan harps on that all the time. Like, you can find a great area. If you just hunt it one time, you probably won't see anything. If you never go back, but that could be the spot that once a week that mature buck comes walking through there, and you might only see a couple of deer that whole week.
Yep.
So that's the one thing I think we've learned a lot from some of the Virginia mountain hunters is that patience game. Like if you really find an area that you have either a really good feeling about or some evidence that there's deer been using it or have been using it during the time frame that you're looking at hunting it, if you can spend some time out there and have some trust in the habitat, the terrain, and how the layout is, and get in clean, it can pay off, but it's not like a fast hunt. It's not.
No. And I'll elaborate on that. I'm going to tell you right now. Most people that I know that hunt won't do what I do and what Devin does and what Jim does, Jim Forbes, they won't do it. Most people are not, they're not getting enough out of the hunt if they have to sit 5 or 6 days and not see a deer. I'm willing to do it. It's not easy, but I'm willing to do it. And but that's part of it. You're just not going to see a lot of deer in these mountains. You're just not going to, except in very rare, unusual situations. But the density is very low, and all I can do as far as data, I can tell you what you can look at. You can go look at the check-in data, and even though the acreage of the national forest is huge, the percentage of deer checked in on national forest versus public land is minuscule. I can't remember the number. I think I looked it up one time. Actually, me and Jeff were talking about it. I was doing a post, and I think it was something like maybe 10% of the deer killed in national forest for the whole state. That's low. That's really low.
Well, it goes back to your earlier point, too, about how spots change and the deer might shift to this oak flat. I mean, you just think about it. There's so few deer in such a large area. Why would they not, move around and go to where the best resources are?
Yeah, they will. They will do that. And another thing, the habitat is not great. I mean, let's face it. The mountain is not near as good as the farm. Okay, it's just not. It's not. I mean, it's just not the habitat. It doesn't lend itself well to producing large numbers of deer. So, and I tell you something, we didn't even talk about predators. The predators are hard on them too. Coyotes, bears, bobcats. And I don't know what it is like where you're at, but coyotes are like increasing everywhere now. It's nothing for me. On any given day, I'm in a stand, I can hear coyotes howling, either at night or before daylight. Especially early in the mornings, I hear them all over the place.
Let me ask you this, because you're talking about the habitats, not great in this area, and we've heard it from other people. If the Game and Fish or DNR are here, would 100% take your advice to make it better, what would make the national forest better?
Controlled cutting, select cutting. In areas where they have done that, it's had amazing results. They just don't do it enough. They used to do it. Matter of fact, there was an area that I hunted, and back in the 80s, they went in and they cut blocks, and they left blocks, and they cut blocks. They left, cut and woods, and then after a few years, those cut areas grew up, and the hunting was phenomenal. You get in there between those blocks where the open woods were, and like we were talking about earlier, thick, openings between thickets, but it produced so much food and cover, and it just made the habitat so much better, and the deer flocked in there. There's just not enough of that being done. Now, I'm pretty excited about a spot. There's a spot not far from here where they recently timbered out about probably about 40 acres. I'm just guessing the size, and cut it all. And in a couple of years, that's going to be good. But because once you cut that timber out, just the native vegetation comes like crazy, grows like crazy. And but if I had to suggest, and not just me, everybody that hunts in national forest would say the same thing. We need better habitat. Yeah, big timber is really not good habitat for deer, except for the fact that it produces acorns. But big timber, you get that canopy up there, you get no ground growth, and then if you don't have any ground growth, then you don't have any browse.
Yeah, I'm pretty optimistic about that these days because a lot more people are talking about that than there used to be. And I feel like a lot of deer hunters are coming around to that because you will talk to deer hunters who are like, don't cut down the trees. Like, that's where I hunt. Understandably so. Like, I get where they're coming from, but they don't realize how much better it can be. Yeah. But I think that's changing.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's got to be select cutting. Like I say, not like the example I gave you with that one area where they cut those blocks. That was perfect, the way they did that. And that place the hunting was great. Now what's happened is that cutover is all grown back into big trees again. It's still pretty thick, but it's big trees. Not like it was. When the trees are the first 2 or 3 years, that's when you get all the browse, the little leaves, and they're low to the ground. It's a lot better for the deer.
Absolutely. Well,
And the turkeys too. Turkeys, and the bears. One day, as a matter of fact, it was the neatest thing. I was hiking up out of the woods, and there was an area off the Blue Ridge Parkway where they had cut a big, maybe 5 acres to improve the view from the parkway. So I'm hiking up out of the national forest and going up in there, and I see bushes moving, and the bushes are about 6 feet high, and these bushes are moving and all, and I'm like, what in the world? So I'm scouting. It's before season. I start sneaking around, and I catch a glimpse of black. And so I snuck around. I got within about 40 yards of the bear. It was a bear, and he was sitting on his haunches, pulling these leaves and eating these leaves off the plant, whatever plant it was. I don't remember now, but that's just an example. I mean, even bears, they'll gravitate to places like that for food.
One thing, Ralph, I want the viewers and the listeners to know of is your YouTube channel. So, real quick, remind us the name of your YouTube channel and what all do you put there that people can kind of watch and follow along and learn from you with some of the content that you're putting out there.
Okay, the name of the channel is Old Dude Outdoors. I'm the old dude, by the way. And so, I'm not a professional by any means. I don't have a lot of fancy equipment, but what you see is the real deal. Okay, it's hunting public land, and I try to get as much information in my videos as possible. Like a lot of times when I have a hunt, it's not just about filming the hunt, showing the hunt. I'll try to talk about why. Why did this deer show up here? And a good example is the buck I told you about, the late season buck I got year before last. I talked about the doe showed up feeding, and the late rut came in. Last year, the buck I killed when the acorn production changed, and they were on the ridge behind me, and I moved the stand. I talked about that in that video. So I kind of like to maybe be a little bit of a mentor to people, newcomers. There's a lot of guys that know a lot more than me that are out there hunting, but there's a lot of people new coming into it. And so, I like to kind of be a teacher. That's kind of what I'm doing, and entertainment too. But also to focus on the fact that, good deer hunting doesn't have to be about Boone and Crockett's. Okay. I go out there and I'm shooting deer probably a lot of these guys wouldn't even think about shooting. But I know how hard I'm hunting for them, and I know they're a trophy to me because of the effort it takes. And, and that goes back to habitat. In bad habitat or not ideal habitat, a buck's not always going to grow big antlers because that nutrition's got to go to his body first, right? So, a nice mountain buck that's 4.5 years old, he might have, just be an 8-pointer that's 15 inches wide, 110-inch deer. And maybe that's not a trophy to a lot of people, but that's a hard deer to hunt. But yeah, he's still a trophy, But on my channel, I do that, and I also do fishing. I'm as crazy about fishing as I am about hunting, and I do a lot of fishing. Matter of fact, I've been posting a lot of fishing here lately. I do a lot of bass fishing, striper fishing, and also I put some other things about nature. I love snakes. I catch rattlesnakes. Yeah, I know y'all think I'm crazy, whoever's watching. I catch rattlesnakes. I love snakes. I have been since I was a little kid. which got me in a lot of trouble because my parents didn't like it, and I'd sneak them in the house in shoe boxes and stuff, and they'd find them by surprise. And so I can tell you, I got my butt whipped a lot for that. But anyway, I have videos of snakes, nature. I love nature just in general. A lot of times I take videos of all the different critters I might see. I also like filming, the animals live, not just hunting. Like out of season, I love filming animals when I can see them, and I do that a lot when I'm scouting. So I have nature, and I have hunting, and I have fishing. I even have some cooking, because I like to cook too, especially wild game. I do a lot of that.
I want you to real quick talk about cooking. I just want a quick segment on this.
Okay.
What is like one of your favorite recipes for venison, for deer?
Okay.
Prepare.
So for venison, as most people know, venison, of course, is very lean, and you have to keep it moist. If when I first started trying to cook it a long time ago, I throw it on the grill and dry it out, it'd be like eating shoe leather, right? So what I do is I like to make things in broth or gravies, things like that. One of my family's favorites is I'll take venison. You can use the flank, the steak, or you can use the loin, and make steaks. And I cook it in a mushroom gravy. So what I throw it on the grill and sear it first. I'll sear it on the grill, and then I'll cook it slow for like 2 or 3 hours at a low temperature in a mushroom with fresh mushrooms, and they love that. That's really good. And then I grind a lot of it. I don't buy any ground meat at the store. I use ground venison, but I mix bacon. As we have talked about, a deer is so lean, you need a little bit of fat, and there's lots of ways. Some people get beef fat, whatever. But I buy this cheap bacon. It's called ends and pieces. You can get big packages of it, and I mix it at about 10 or 15% to the venison. And matter of fact, I got a video for doing that last year. Showed my recipe and everything, and how I do it. But yeah, I do a lot of ground meat. You mentioned bear. Bear is really good meat, and a lot of people are just kind of learning that. A lot of people didn't eat bear for a long time because we didn't have a lot of bears. Now you got more and more people killing bears. But I make the barbecue, like pulled barbecue with the bear meat. It is great on the smoker. Yeah, on the smoker. Take a big chunk off the rear like a ham or even a front shoulder. I smoke it for about 8 hours. I'm going to get the internal temperature up to 160. Then I'm going to wrap it in foil, keep it on the smoker, and bring the temperature on up to 190, 200, and then take it off and let it rest until the temperature drops. I leave my thermometer in there, and when that temperature drops down to where I can handle it, like 130, that meat will you wouldn't believe it. It's tender as it can be. Yeah.
Makes me want a big old bear roast.
Yeah. It's as good as any barbecue you ever have. It really is.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Man, I hope people go out and subscribe to your YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So that sounds like awesome.
Well, I appreciate y'all guys letting me, plug it on here. It's great.
Old Dude Outdoors.
Old Dude Outdoors.
Awesome.
Just look for this old dude right here.
Well, Ralph, listen, we appreciate the time you spent with us coming over here doing the podcast. And
Man, I've enjoyed it. It's been fun. I can talk about hunting and fishing all day long. I told y'all. Don't get me started. I'm not done. I'm ready. I'm ready for some more.
we'll have to get you back on for a future episode. But for all the viewers and listeners out there, thank y'all for watching and listening. And we'll catch you back here in the next episode from the Southern Outdoorsmen podcast. And remember, guys, y'all stay Southern.